and welcome to J. Hutch Talks Too Much. I am the host of J. Hutch Talks Too Much. My name is Jesse, and this is my podcast vlog. I don't know what it is. I don't know what this is called, but whatever it is, I'm doing it. So yeah, I thought that I would use this first video to talk to you about what this thing is going to be about. And I thought that the best way to get into talking about what it's going to be about is to show you this tweet that I saw a few months ago that basically was the thing that got me started to think about, doing something like this. And it's this tweet here. So this was the initial tweet that came out, very innocuous, by a writer who writes for The Atlantic, writes essays and things like that. Caitlin Flanagan asked a very simple question: what are 3 books that every American should read by high school graduation? And somebody responded by saying, serious answer, whatever is most popular amongst teens at the time. Forcing kids to read important books is more likely to turn them away from reading for pleasure than to encourage it. The skills taught in English Lit can be covered by using any book. Okay, so I want to actually respond to the second tweet. And by the way, this was the second most popular response. I think you saw it had about 309 likes. So a lot of people liked it. It's not that unique of a view. I've certainly heard it before. And I will say I think that in many ways it's coming from a good place. And I do agree with an element of it. And I'll talk about that as well. But I think I essentially, basically, fundamentally disagree with a significant aspect of it. And by the way, when I first said that I was going to be talking about that particular tweet, I just showed that to my partner before, and her response was to say, so you're basically going to establish yourself as an angry old man in this thing that you're doing, which I guess I am going to do. And in some ways, I probably can't help it. A friend of mine says that I was 54 years old at birth, referring to me, not referring to him. So yeah, I can't really help myself in sort of taking on that particular viewpoint. So what is it about it that bothers me? Well, the first thing I would say is, that you should essentially look at whatever is most popular amongst teen at the times. I'm sure the writer didn't mean it this way, but it kind of comes across as saying, you should basically do what the popular kids are doing, and I always thought that wasn't the right message to send to anybody, but especially not a good message to send to kids. When I was young, and I'm sure that parents still use, well, maybe it's too cliched now to use, so it is a cliche, but there was that kind of classic expression, if everybody jumps off the Brooklyn Bridge, does that mean that you should? And what does that essentially mean? It just means if there's something that's really popular, does that mean you automatically have to do it? Maybe the answer to that now is yes, you should, but I'm still thinking that there's some problems with that. Now, again, I want to give that person their due by not necessarily saying that they intended it to mean that, but I do think that it does come across that way, right? What should you teach? Well, you should teach what is popular. Look at what all the kids are reading, and basically just do that as well. Just reintroduce them to things that they're essentially already familiar with. Which brings me to, I think, the biggest issue with that tweet, which in my opinion is that that point of view is entirely the opposite of what a teacher should be doing in a classroom experience. And I'm an English instructor at a university, so this is an issue that I think about all the time. Now, there's an element, as I say, that I do agree with that tweet. obviously, I don't think, as the person says, and actually, let me just go back to it here for a second. So they say, forcing kids to read important books is more likely to turn them away from reading for pleasure than to encourage it. And I do agree with that essentially. You shouldn't force kids to read important books, right? Whatever, however you take that, right? I don't think that you should necessarily be doing that. And that does in many ways speak to my own experience. In high school, for example, every year from grade 9 onwards, we would read a Shakespeare play. And I think that this is probably the experience of most students in English courses, is that you're bombarded with Shakespeare. And you're essentially just told that this is the most important writer of all time. This is the greatest writer of all time. And I remember just resenting having to read Shakespeare the whole time. We started us off with a comedy, a nice light comedy. They gave us Twelfth Night, and I think I was around Act 2 when I said, I haven't laughed once while reading this play. There's nothing fun. Sir Toby Belch, what is that? There's nothing funny about that at all. And I still maintain to this, I don't think I've ever laughed heartily at any Shakespeare play. I don't find them hilarious. I would much rather watch a Simpsons episode or a Seinfeld than watch, Twelfth Night for laughs. If that's what I was trying to get out of something, I would choose the former rather than the latter. And so I did come out of high school largely resenting Shakespeare and the fact that I was supposed to like Shakespeare or just accept the fact that he was a great and important writer. I had some real issues with, and I think quite rightly, I had issues with it. In fact, it wasn't until I sort of came to Shakespeare on my own in university that I started to kind of click in with Shakespeare. But I had to kind of undo all of that baggage. And so I do agree with the basic point of that tweet. A teacher should not be enforcing their vision of an ideal cultural, what they see as ideal culture, onto their students. I think that is going to most likely only going to build up resentment. So I do agree with that element of it. But I do think also at the same time, if you are a teacher, especially if you're a teacher in the humanities, as I am, that you have an obligation to show students that there is a whole world that exists beyond their small experiences of it, right? We all basically have a fairly small experience of the world, right? And in actual fact, the world contains multitudes, right? It contains many various different viewpoints and experiences and different ways of looking at the world and different ways of expressing yourself in that world. And those kinds of things, when you confront those things or when you see those different experiences, well, that gives you, I think that gives you options, right? That gives you ways to think about things, different ways to think about things, different ways to think about yourself, different ways to think about your life and the life that you could be living, different ways to think about the society in which you live and what different societies could potentially look like. But I think that when you say to a student, here, let me show you this thing that you already know, or that you already have really good access to, that you have a really good chance of experiencing, then you are in many ways not giving them those options, right? You're not giving them access to those other kinds of potential experiences and other potential ways of living. Suppose, for example, you teach a music class. You have two options. Well, normally you would have more than just two options, but let's say you have these two options, right? You can introduce students to Lorde, or you can introduce them to Olivia Rodrigo. These are names that I had to look up. So you could introduce them to those people, or you could introduce them to people like Blind Boy Fuller, right? A country folk blues singer, songwriter from the 1930s, or Rosie and the Originals, a kind of very offbeat rock and roll band from the 1950s. girl who wrote a song at the age of 14, I think. I would say for the most part, with those two options, you're basically saying, here, I'm going to introduce you to something that you could easily find on your own. You can turn on the radio and hear Lord 40 times in one day, right? So this is something that students could easily find on their own. But are they going to find Blind Boy Fuller on their own? Are they going to find Rosie and the Originals on their own? Probably not. Now, that doesn't mean that you say Blind Boy Fuller is better than the thing that you are accessing every day. It doesn't mean to say that you should be liking Blind Boy Fuller, but it does mean that you are at least giving them the option to experience those things and decide for themselves whether or not they like them or not, right? And once you show students that there's something else beyond the world that they experience every day, then maybe they'll be encouraged to look for more of those things. And this in some ways speaks to what Noam Chomsky, and by the way, I will most likely quote Noam Chomsky in every single video that I do, so be prepared for that. Noam Chomsky will talk about education, and he'll say that really the most ideal thing to do in an education is to stimulate a student's desire to learn. Basically, if you are potentially, one of the things that you can do, and I don't think you could ever capture everybody, but if you introduce students to this wide variety of possibilities, then I do think that you're going to have many of them say, oh, there are things beyond the world that I am aware of that I need to look for, right? And I'm going to now go exploring. And if you can foster that desire to explore in someone, and it doesn't have to be a student, but in someone, then I think that that's ultimately a good thing, right? Another philosopher who you'll probably hear from on this channel, Wilhelm von Humboldt, let me try it a third time and potentially a fourth and a fifth time. Wilhelm von Humboldt said that there is a need of human beings for a variety of situations if they are going to develop their powers to the fullest extent. And basically that's Humboldt saying, in order for people to achieve the most that they could possibly achieve, be the best that they could be, even by their own standard, not by any external standard, but by their own standards, they need to access as much as possible, as much culture as they possibly can, take in as much as they can, not to be influenced by all of it, not to say all of it is great, but once again, to be aware of what their options are beyond just the status quo. Because again, I think if all you're doing is saying, oh, you all like this stuff, well, now let's spend the next couple months talking about this thing that most of you are already aware of, you're not giving them access to a variety of situation, right? You're giving them access to something that they already know. Now, one of the things that I do recognize is that it's hard to get students engaged with something unfamiliar, right? And something that is unlike their own experiences. However, I don't think that the proper response to this is to say, well, because it's so hard, basically what I'm going to do is just facilitate your desire to only experience things that you already know and already feel comfortable with, right? I think that in many ways, and I admit that it's really, really hard. It's extraordinarily difficult and it sounds insurmountable. That the thing that what a really good instructor or teacher can do is essentially make people as excited or as interested and invested in this thing that they are unfamiliar with, that they haven't experienced, as the thing that they are already familiar with, right? That's a hard thing. And I think because it's so hard, that's the reason why you often get people saying what that person was saying, which was just to give them the things that they've already, that they already enjoy. Just to go back to once again to the sort of the last thing that they said, the skills taught in English Lit can be covered using any book. I think that that's certainly true of part of English or the humanities or whatever. Like you could say the same thing if you are, teaching filmmaking. Sure. I mean, could you essentially teach students the skills of filmmaking just by showing them Marvel films? Sure, but that's only half of it, right? I think that you are doing people a disservice if they walk into a film class and you already show them things that they've already seen, right? It completely limits their options, right? If they're going to go out, let's say, and happen to become filmmakers, all they're going to do is just replicate the one thing that they have seen over and over and over again, right? All this does is basically ensure that the status quo just keeps getting repeated. So I know that I've talked a lot here about teaching and students and things like that, but what I'm saying I think applies to everybody, right? So this is not going to be a channel about teaching. It's not for students. It's basically my attempt to try to do what I just said was that insurmountable thing, to talk about things that are unfamiliar to a lot of people, but to try to talk about them in a way that gets them as interested and engaged and excited as the things that they are already familiar with. And I know I've talked about a variety of different things here. This tweet was about literature. That is my academic background, so I am going to talk about literature a fair amount. So I have a kind of a list of sort of a lot of historical literature that I do want to talk about. So I'll be talking about that. I also want to talk about film, and I do also want to talk about Canadian politics, because this is taking place in Canada. There seems to be, I've looked around, a few podcasts about American politics. You may have encountered one or two in your time. So this is going to, there are ones about Canadian politics too. I know that they're out there. As somebody who is speaking from Canada, I feel a certain kind of responsibility to talk about the things that are going on here. So I'll talk about those things as well. But the large attempt is in a way to kind of try to speak to as broad of a group as possible, not just in the academic world, not just to people who already believe what I believe, but to try to speak to as many different people as possible. I hope to speak with many people as well. So if you see this and you feel like you have something to say, let me know, and we'll have you on here as well. I'm going to be mostly, I think, doing live stuff. This is not live, but I'm going to be doing mostly live stuff from here on out. I have to decide on a day that I'm going to do it on, so bear with me, but you'll find out soon. In the meantime, please like this video, please clap, and please subscribe to the channel. That would be awesome if you could do that. And I hope that you stick with it. And I hope that this can in some ways be an enjoyable experience for all of us. So thanks very much for watching this, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, take care, bye-bye.